The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
All right, so I'm going to start this off with probably one of the most important reasons why I'm having this conversation, other than the fact that I just have so much respect for you. But if you guys are not watching this on Spotify or on YouTube, let me give you a visual here. We've got a good looking white American man right here. And the reason I say that is because Dr. Mark Brauner just got back from Gaza, and he was one of the medical doctors that went to Gaza. And the reason I'm stressing that is because, I've had other people on the podcast that have been to Gaza, Dr. Mimi Syed, I had Dr. Thayer Ahmad, and I'll be honest, I had some people say, oh, well, looks like you're bringing on, Muslim and I had one person say this, brown doctors. Well, of course they're going to be advocating for Gaza. Of course they're going to, take that side. And Mark Brauner is like the old school John Baker from the TV show Chips. And I'll play the role of Frank Poncherello. But seriously, man, I wanted to start off with that, and that's a little bit of an awkward intro, but I want to set the stage for people to know, hey, okay, if you've tried to poke holes in other people that I've brought onto this podcast because their skin is a certain color, here we go. Here is a white American doctor who, out of the goodness of his heart and quite frankly, the ethics and integrity I'm sure he lives his life by, decided to go over to Gaza and to see everything for himself. And quite frankly, to just, be the best of humanity and help what's happening in Gaza. So listen, man, welcome. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Ray. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So let's start off with, let's get right into it. Tell us about, I guess, the path you took to get there. Like, did you just decide one day, oh my God, I can't take this anymore, I want to go and help? Like, how does that even happen?
Well, I grew up in a political family, and I've been aware of Palestine and the occupation for most of my adult life. So probably greater than 40 years.
Wow.
So, I've been aware of this. And when things escalated from occupation, from apartheid to genocide, that's when I knew I had to do something. I think Americans often feel this concept of diffusion of responsibility. And we always think that somebody else is going to act, somebody else is going to do something. And, a lot of the time they're right. But this is an extraordinary circumstance, and I happen to have the skills necessary to help. And so about a little over a year ago, I finally said, that's it. I have to go. And it took me a whole year to find an organization, a non-governmental organization that would be able to safely, place me in a war zone and safely get me out. And I went with the Rockwell Worldwide, which was a fantastic nonprofit out of Michigan. And they did a phenomenal job of getting me there safely and setting me up and putting me in a situation where I could make a difference. And so, of course, there's a massive collapse of the, infrastructure, but Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza is still a highly functioning. Well, I know we can talk more about that in a minute, but, at least I knew I could go there and make a difference. And, I'm an atheist. And when I got there after, 12, 14 hours of frankly, just blood and guts, we would sit outside on a patio underneath a railing so we could be hidden from quadcopters and drones that could potentially strike you. We'd hunker down and talk. And my colleagues, these brilliant, wonderful, caring, compassionate colleagues, were like, wow, a white guy from the United States who's an atheist nonetheless is here. And they didn't really quite understand. And, compassion is universal.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't need to fit in any type of specific, faith. And I appreciate faith, all faiths. And it was a wonderful experience to sit down and sort of share with people that, sort of a humanist approach of integrity and a commitment to human welfare is universal. I mean, it's exactly how they felt. I felt this calling to show up and to act. And, this is compatible with Islam. And in Islam, there's a concept called zakat, which is a value of charity. And I mean, in any Islamic culture, you could, literally, if you found yourself isolated, you could walk up to somebody's house, knock on the door, and ask for help, and they would feel compelled to help you. They're extremely generous people. So I got there. It took me a year to get there. I initially thought I might be able to get in with the German Red Cross, and I went to Frankfurt last October to kind of stage, and then things blew up in the West Bank. And at that time, I was trying to get into a hospital in the West Bank, and things just blew up, and it was unsafe, and I couldn't go. Finally, I mean, I was part of probably 13 different Palestine medical associations, constantly on WhatsApp, in chat rooms, and talking before I found this opportunity. And I feel I was so lucky to hook up and get accepted and get into the program. And, when our team was originally 20 people, 20 surgeons and physicians from all over the place. And ultimately, the IDF only allowed 6 of us to get in. So there's
Wow.
this huge attrition rate. I mean, just huge. So really only a small fraction of physicians are actually making it in. And unfortunately, a lot of the times you get cut while you're in Amman, sort of staging to get through Israel into Gaza. And so, there are so many people that want to go. And, since I've been back, I'm just fielding one call after another, emails, texts from providers all across the country in the United States saying, how can I get in there? And so many of them are nurses, for example, and
Well, that's
they're so
amazing.
hands on, they really want to get in
Yeah.
there and help. And there's just like no mechanism. So, I know that once there's a permanent and unconditional ceasefire, there's just going to be a flood of Americans in
So
to help.
did you fly from so you flew from United States to Amman, Jordan, and the NGO that you hooked up with, they're kind of managing the logistics. And then talk us through that, I guess crossing the border because
Yeah.
it's all under Israeli control, right? Like did they question the shit out of you? Were
You
they
know,
like, what are you doing? Why are
It
you
was,
here?
it was extremely surreal. So first of
Yeah.
all, we get dropped off in this mass of people, literally legions and battalions of people jockeying and pushing to get through the Hussein Bridge gate.
Yeah.
And then onto it took us like 6 hours in 100-degree sunny weather. We finally made it through. But everyone was great in the crowd. People were sharing water and making jokes and laughing. It was an intense, but really cool, very cool experience. And then we got into a bus that took us to the Israeli border. And there we went through customs and, checks with the IDF. They went through all of our stuff. For example, I had a relatively brand new iPhone. They decided that they were going to charge me value added tax of $1,000. So I couldn't leave without giving them $1,000 cash. I,
Oh my God.
mistakenly made the comment, well, I'm already funding your war with my US tax dollars. And they just stopped and stared at me. And I was like, oh man, I screwed up. They're going to kick me
Yeah.
out. And so I just sort of like diminutively just sort of like shrunk and turned, and they went ahead and passed me through. But, I was ready. I was prepared for, interrogation. I was kind of hoping they would in some ways, because
Yeah.
I had this great thing if they said, so what do you think about Hamas? I was going to say, well, who wouldn't love, chickpeas and garlic and, a little bit of
Yeah.
lemon
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
tahini. I mean, come
I
on,
love it.
you
I
know?
love it. I love it. That would
But
have been good.
unfortunately, I didn't get to use that line. And so then we made our way to a United Nations convoy. And it was the classic, tons of white vehicles with the big blue flags. And we drove through Israel, down just below Tel Aviv, and then crossed into Gaza. And that was, like a frightening experience, because they had a series of gates, and these gates were just mammoth. I mean,
Yeah.
gigantic, 40 feet tall, you know,
These are massive gates from Tel Aviv getting into Gaza. So obviously, these have been up for decades from what I've
yeah,
understood. So like,
yeah, absolutely.
people hear the Gaza is an open air prison and they don't understand it literally is.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're telling us there's these massive, dude, were you
Yeah.
scared shitless? Like
You
I
know,
would have been nervous.
I was so nervous that I actually bought a special term life insurance policy for myself for $1 million. And, because my regular term life insurance, because I have dependents and, children, and, you know, I needed a $1 million life insurance policy, paid $22,000 cash for my $1 million life insurance policy for this. That's how afraid I was. And of course, the moment I walked out safely out of Gaza, I was like, oh, I regret spending that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
$22,000. But oh my gosh, I mean, it was frightening. First of all, driving through northern Gaza is truly a wasteland. It is just rubble and dust. There are no animals. I mean, it's very bizarre and scary. And then, while we were at
And
Nasser
it's
Hospital,
rubble and dust because they've blown it all up, right? Like the
yeah,
things
they've
we're
blown it all up,
seeing.
and now they are, now they're bringing in heavy equipment and crushing what's left into true
Yeah.
dust. I don't know, like, have you ever traveled in a developing country where, people take large rocks and they break them into smaller rocks and into dust in a line, to make concrete and plaster for housing. And it's what they're doing. They're taking it from superstructure to dust, and it is so unnatural and so bizarre. And but then, once we got to Nasser Hospital, was, highly functioning trauma center,
Yeah.
albeit with, limited equipment and resources, but just doing a phenomenal job at, taking critically ill, unstable patients and
Is
stabilizing them.
Nasser Hospital,
Yeah.
I want people to get a visual. Is Nasser Hospital look like, a Kaiser Permanente? Like, is it like a real structure? It's
Yeah.
big, it's massive, and it has not been, I guess, damaged because I think it's the only hospital left, if I'm not mistaken. 35 out of 36 hospitals
Yeah.
have been blown
Yeah,
up.
there's a small hospital in near Gaza City that is um still having limited resources. I mean, extremely limited resources. Not a functioning hospital at all. But yeah, so that's a great point, Ray. Nasser Hospital is about a 500 bed hospital. In your average city of, say, 250,000 people in the United States, like a, decent sized city,
Yeah.
you'll probably have one or two 100 to 200 bed hospitals. So it's a pretty big hospital.
Okay.
It's the
Okay.
equivalent of a smaller academic, US hospital. But, and it's interesting though, because they normally have a robust number of services, but because of the genocide and all the destruction of the 35 other hospitals, all of the specialists who haven't been killed have migrated to Nasser. So you have all of these, Palestinian specialists there who are able to really dive in and, and get her done.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah.
It is shocking how well that hospital is working. And that really goes, it speaks so much to the people there, the nurses.
Is the internal clean? Like I always worry about, I mean, hell, sepsis kills like
Yeah.
200,000 Americans in US hospitals. So like when I think of like sepsis in the Nasser hospital, is it clean? I mean, what is it
Yeah, yeah.
like?
So I mean, it's constantly being cleaned, and they're using, especially in surgery, they're using really good aseptic technique.
Okay,
But
amazing.
in the trauma resuscitation area, it was just so overwhelmed that we definitely cut corners. Unfortunately, sometimes we were always trying to do as good a job as we could. But for example, I had a situation where I had a 12-year-old boy that was shot in the head, and he had what we call brains out. So he had gray matter, brain tissue in his hair, but he was still breathing. He still had good vital signs. It was an isolated injury, nothing else. He was laying in a pool of blood, literally a quarter of an inch deep. And I was kneeling in that same blood pool. And I was trying to intubate him, which is to put a breathing tube down into his
Yeah.
lungs to breathe for him. We were eventually going to try to elevate his head and hyperventilate him for a little while, like breathe quickly for him so that we could blow off extra CO2, which would decrease his intracranial pressure and make it so they have a better chance of survival. And I couldn't quite get my body in a position to intubate him. So I said to somebody, "Hey, can we please pull him out into the room a little bit?" When somebody grabbed his feet and pulled him, the dressing on his head came off, and we pulled his brain tissue and his skull through the blood of 5 other people.
My God.
So, once I got him intubated, I turned him on his side. I took antiseptic and soap and large amounts of water, and I just sat there and tried to clean the back of his head as well as I could. We started him on antibiotics. I have a feeling there was a unlikely that he was going to survive anyway. I would say that in general, they followed really phenomenal aseptic technique, very clean, people constantly cleaning. Every 20 minutes, a crew of people would come into the resuscitation room and squeegee the floors clean. They would be just completely covered in blood and then down the drain, 20 minutes later. But yeah, so it's a highly functioning, pretty big hospital. It's very impressive. But
Okay,
what
okay.
makes it
But
really
but obviously what you're describing, I mean, it's hard to even understand how just insane that must look while you're in it. Like, I can't even imagine trying to perform something medical on a child, let alone something involving, a brains out situation like you described, being in a pool of, quarter-inch blood. Like,
yeah,
that's insane. That
it
is
is. And
insane.
the other part of it was that there would be 30 or 40 patients there. Sometimes they'd be stacked up on top of each other, waiting for us to get to them, you know? And yeah, it was overwhelming. I think if you people have seen the TV show The Pit,
Yeah,
and it's the last like 3 episodes is a mass casualty event it's pretty intense. It's very chilling, and it seems very much overwhelming. And they saw 112 people in you know, that narrative.
in that
You know,
narrative, yeah.
on June 17th, 2025 at Nasser, we experienced what we think may be the single largest mass casualty event in a civilian hospital in modern history that we can think of. We saw over 400 trauma patients.
That's insane.
250 of them were unstable multi-system trauma patients requiring aggressive resuscitation, multiple procedures, life-saving procedures, and going to surgery. 95 people died on the table or on the floor while we were working on them. And then the rest had serious, serious injuries. And so, you look at this TV show, the Pit, which is a pretty good show. And in that mass casualty, they saw 112. We saw between 4 and 450 people that day. So 4 times that number.
That is amazing. What time did your day start? Are you like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
what's
Well,
the
it's really
shifts?
funny because the work is so uh, absurd
Yeah,
that there really was no schedule for the international doctors. So when we got there, uh, I was with another U.S. emergency physician from Houston, and we thought to ourselves, we're going to work 10, 12-hour days, take a break and come back. And the other emergency physicians from Gaza were like, well, I think you should try 4 hours. Just do 4 hours. And we're like,
4.
4 hours.
Yeah,
And, after 4 hours, I found myself staggering away, literally just staggering away from the emergency department, just going, like, holy moly, what is going on here? And so yeah, I mean, like, I was there for
and that's because it's just patient after
yeah,
patient after
yeah.
patient after patient. And by the way, are these wounds predominantly like gunshot wounds? Like, are people getting I honestly, from what I see,
Yeah,
they're almost getting snipered off,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's not like random gunshot wounds like in the abdomen or in the leg. It seems like sniper gunshot wounds to where they're being picked off like this, right?
absolutely. So there's been an evolution in the injury patterns. So early on in the genocide when there were still a lot of structures. When these structures were being demolished with bombs, people were getting a lot of crush injuries. So there are a lot of people who are just, crushed.
Crushed.
And there's like a whole sort of different pathophysiology of crush injuries and, how to take care of them, what to predict, et cetera. But then, there are no superstructures anymore. They're just exposed people. And, so if they're hit by tanks, which we saw, which would happen some days, these tank shells would just rip through everything. So you have combined head, neck, chest, abdomen, limbs, just completely shredded, like they were thrown through, a meat shredder. And those patients are so challenging to take care of. I mean, they're lethality of those, even if they seem initially relatively stable, the chance for infection and
Yeah.
long-term disability and everything is so high. But when most of the time that I was there, so I got there June 12th, which was very shortly after the GHF started their so-called food distributions.
Yeah.
And that's when we started to really see these predictable sniper types of attacks. And I'm not a weapons expert, and I'm not an expert in sort of war injury. And now those experts are coming out and they're looking at the data and they're saying, absolutely, this was intentional sniper. And even IDF soldiers and other people responsible for this have started to leak information that that's precisely what they were doing. So one day we would see all head injuries. So in the front of the head, the side of the head, large caliber projectile wreaking just catastrophic injury to the brain and the skull. Some people were probably lucky enough to survive, but probably with great disability. Many were dead upon arrival. But then the next day we would see neck wounds. And so we'd see all these crazy neck wounds where it would often either make them quadriplegic, paralyzed for the rest of their life, maybe even to the point where they stop breathing on their own. Other times they just wreck the trachea. So air would escape underneath the tissue. We call it crepitance. And so you have like it's like Rice Krispies in the chest and neck. And those patients needed to be intubated and needed to have a breathing tube down their lungs for a long period of time before they can get a repair. And those patients are also really at high risk because long-term intubation under these circumstances puts them at really high risk for what we call ventilator-assisted pneumonia and, fungal infections and
Yeah.
complex infections. And then the next day, then we'd see all chest injuries. And then we would see all groin injuries. And the groin injuries are like among the worst. You think the groin, well, you've got major blood vessels that are
Yeah.
there that are very difficult to compress, to put direct pressure on to, stave the bleeding. And also they often will come with rectal and gut injuries. So not only do you have all this vascular trauma, but you got feces,
Yeah.
mixed in among it all, and it's just so devastating to look at a 10-year-old boy who has this and he's awake and thinking and talking and you're looking at him in the face and you're just, trying to not sort of convey by the way that you look, to
Yeah.
them that
Yeah.
your life is over, kid, and it's devastating, and, it's funny because a lot of people say that it's hard to put words to describe what's going on. And it's really not that hard to put words to it. It's just that the words are so foul and
Yeah.
grotesque
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
abnormal and, gut wrenching that it's hard to put words to it, but
No, I
yeah,
get it, man. I get it.
yeah,
It's hard to even visualize. Like again, I mean, I'm trying to visualize everything as you're talking about it, and I really want the audience to visualize just how insane what you're saying you saw day after day after day, hour after hour after hour. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this in your career in the United States? Like even one
no.
time?
No, I mean, occasionally when I've worked at major trauma centers, I've seen, 5 or 6 major trauma patients all at the same time, explosions, large multi-vehicle car accidents, but nothing like this, and In March of 2020, when COVID was really hitting
Yeah.
Manhattan, I was lucky enough to get some time off, and I went to New York Presbyterian at the height of the COVID crisis in New York,
Wow.
and yeah, worked for a month. Um, and I saw that was unnatural. I mean, there were days where 100 people died.
Okay. Wow.
And so that was, I think that was the closest to this. But and I've worked in Mexico, and I've seen pickup trucks go off of bridges with 15 people in the bed of the pickup truck, all landing in boulders,
Yeah.
and but that didn't compare. That's 1 hour
Yeah. Yeah.
in Gaza and
Yeah.
Nasser,
Yeah.
you know? And so I don't think anybody has, and I've even talked to some of my colleagues that had a lot of experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, what they described to me was just wholly different, radically different
Wow.
than what we
Interesting.
experienced, you know?
Okay, okay.
Um,
And by the way, I should have started the interview with this. You're an emergency physician. You're not a surgeon though, are you?
Correct. I'm not. I'm a board certified emergency
Okay,
physician.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. And so I have to imagine how many people that are coming in, I guess, just require physician services, and then how many people actually need surgery.
Yeah. Well, the Nasser Emergency Department was pretty large, but I really pretty much just stayed in the trauma
Okay,
resuscitation room,
okay, okay, okay.
predominantly because, that's where the sickest and most injured people were. But that's also the only place where everybody spoke English. So all the
Got it.
nurses, all the physicians, a fair amount of the patients and the family. But outside of that, in the regular emergency department where there were lesser injuries, language was just a huge issue. And,
Yeah, yeah,
I would have, interpreters with me sometimes, but they would like wander off. And then, a whole family would grab me and just drag me over to their patient's room thinking, oh, this foreign doctor is going to save Hamad, you know, and, um, and I would just be standing there and I was like, pantomiming, and things
yeah.
like that. Yeah. So I pretty much stayed in the resuscitation room. And most of those patients, I mean, I'd say at least 75% of the patients that I saw eventually went for surgery in some way, shape, or form. The rest of them would probably go to the ICU,
Got it,
who
got
are
it.
fairly stable once we like put in chest tubes or drains around their heart and that kind of thing. But, occasionally it was interesting. Occasionally, we would all of a sudden a complex medical patient would show up out of nowhere. Like somebody's uncle would have a congestive heart failure exacerbation. So right in the middle of the trauma room would be, an old guy, really short of breath, with really high blood
Like
pressure.
a
Yeah.
regular medical
Yeah.
situation.
Like
Oh,
a regular
you
medical
know what? That
situation.
is so fun
Yeah.
that is so
Yeah.
funny. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody even thinks that while all this insanity is going on, there's still regular medical situations that are also happening.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. And the funny part is that this is a Nasser has an emergency medicine residency training program. So there are interns, medical students, residents, and attending physicians who are in charge. But the place
Wow.
is so overwhelmed that everyone's kind of acting independently.
Yeah.
They'd only predominantly only seen trauma for the last, 22 months. So these medically complex and unstable patients would come in and they would kind of stand there and just stare at them and go, and that was one of the areas where, the US physicians were able to help a little bit. We like jumped in and, we started giving them nitrates to lower their blood pressure, putting them on positive pressure ventilation, hitting them with Lasix so they would pee out the fluid overload. And we would give bedside sort of tutorials and things like that. And this is stuff that they knew
Yeah.
intellectually, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just kind of shocked them when it showed up, under the
Yeah. Yeah.
circumstances. But
I could
yeah, and I
imagine.
think that's one of the untold stories of Palestine, of Gaza, and especially from a medical standpoint, is that there's an epistemide, where there's like the death of medical education. The medical schools are gone.
They're
They're
gone.
rubble. All of the documents are gone. Some people don't have any sort of documentation of their 6 years of medical education. And these are highly trained people. And Palestine has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, like 97, 98%. So these, Palestinians take great pride in their intellect and
Education. Yeah.
education. And that's just been destroyed. And what that does is it's just another deep level of trauma to the Palestinian people because, they're going to lose their healthcare providers,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and the infrastructure's gone and, it could take decades to kind of rebuild
Yeah. Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
so
Where did you sleep?
yeah, so all academic hospitals usually have dormitories for medical
Okay.
students and residents to
Okay.
spend the night while they're working. So most of the medical students and residents would walk home to their tents. And so the international visiting doctors would stay in those facilities. And they were quite nice. And actually the sleeping room had air conditioning, which is one of the only places in the hospital. And it was like, it was 100 degrees in the trauma resuscitation bay.
That's
So
insane.
occasionally I would just, I would run up there and just lay in the air conditioning for a little bit. But, while we were there, one of the things that happened is we took a tour of the children's hospital, which was just adjacent to Nasser. And we took a tour there, just taking a break. And we realized, Dr. Fa, the head of the hospital was like, yeah, we have 48 hours of formula left. And this is specialized formula. So these are not just starving, malnourished infants. They
Yeah.
require a specialized formula, no substitute. If you try to substitute, they will die. And they had 48 hours left, and they would get this little trickle of, one or two cans in every couple of days. And so within 30 minutes of being on this tour, I got the domain name Gaza Formula Countdown 2025 and built a
Yeah.
website in literally 45 minutes. And we're like, okay, we need to like raise, awareness of this and, do something about it, and, we tried everything. I mean, we tried to contact the Pope, tried to contact China for airdrop. We tried to work every angle and, we were not successful. It was an amateurish campaign. It was a, shoot from the hip campaign. We didn't, we're just like 4 US doctors. We don't know what we're doing. We just knew that we needed to do something.
Yeah, yeah. Your US doctors turning into web designers, turning
Yeah.
into PR agencies, turning
Yeah.
into dude, it is insane. All right, let me ask you this question. And I asked Tara Ahmad this, and I asked Dr. Mimi Syed the same question. So you're there, you're working on all these people. Did you ever see Hamas militants or any militants? And did you ever treat any militants?
Not that I know of. Like I say, I saw broken people. I
Yeah,
saw skeletal people. I saw, old men with empty pockets and broken sandals. I never saw a weapon, not one, not a knife, anything. I mean, late at night talking to, Palestinians, I asked them, I like, so, do you have, family and friends in Hamas? And they would openly tell me, like, oh, yeah, I mean, my Uncle Harry, my next door neighbor, but, these really weren't true, militants.
they're not militants.
They
Yeah,
worked at a bakery, but
yeah,
they're,
yeah,
they worked at a bakery, but they're pissed off.
yeah,
They
yeah.
have had it with, 75 years of occupation. And, I do not condone civilian violence in any way, shape, or form. Uh, but, I would not paint these brothers and cousins as, who may have had some affiliation with Hamas over the last decades as, being, radical
Like
terrorists.
radical militant people. And again, what I'm trying to understand, and again, I'm trying to visualize everything. It's like, are there guys walking around with machine guns? Are there guys
Yeah.
walking around? Because
Yeah.
what you see in the press,
Yeah.
especially when it's related to like, the disbursement of food, all of a sudden you see Hamas everywhere, and supposedly they're like stealing food, they're doing this. But then at the end of the day, if they're in a war, you would expect some casualties. So where the
Yeah.
hell are they being treated? Where the
Yeah.
hell are they? They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
they're not patrolling anything. There's so
Yeah.
much shadiness to
Yeah. Yeah.
all of that, man.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, when your society falls apart like this, you don't even have to be Hamas to arm yourself.
Yeah,
I
totally.
mean, not only that, but there's credible evidence that Israel has funded warlords in Gaza to, foment chaos.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
so, one of the things that made it really hard for me to leave Nasser, and I mean, it was really hard. I hesitated, and I mean,
How long were
I
you there for?
I was only there for 16 days. I mean, it
I
was
mean,
nothing,
still, that's
nothing,
yeah, but still,
you
man,
know?
that's amazing.
And so, I mean, I fell in love with all these people that I was working there, these amazing, amazing people, and I wanted to stay for them, but I also knew that our presence in the hospital afforded them some modicum of protection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally,
So,
totally.
yeah, they knew, so IDF
But
knows
you're
that
saying,
they're,
like, the presence of American
yep,
doctors in that
typically,
hospital, okay,
yep,
specifically American doctors. Yeah,
yep.
absolutely, absolutely, that makes
And so
total
get
sense.
this, 1 hour after we left, we were gone 1 hour. We were driving up through the north. We were still in the Gaza Strip heading north. And we got a video from one of our favorite nurses who was in a side room, frightened. A armed clan had broken into the emergency department 1 hour after we left and shot the place up, broke equipment, I think shot a couple people, were eventually like out muscled and thrown out of the emergency department. But they knew exactly when we left. They
Got
would
it.
not have come in if we were there.
If
And
you
so
were
that
there,
made it
yeah.
really, really hard to leave.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, that is insane. Did you have how often were you talking to your family? Like, were you able to stay in touch with your family? And then did you have them on the Find Me app? Like, were they able to track your whereabouts and all that? I hope so.
Well, I'm going to give a little plug for T-Mobile because,
Yeah.
I travel a lot and I mean, invariably I get service in any country that I'm in. But so if you stood in a certain spot on the balcony on the fourth floor of the hospital and kind of like turned to the side
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and, close your teeth, you could get
Yeah.
service. And so I had my family and friends on a WhatsApp group, and I would, send them messages, try to send them twice a day to my kids, especially. But it's funny. I mean, I was frightened and I was worried about sort of random missiles hitting the hospital
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Nasser actually was bombed about a year ago and sustained minor damage, but they were bombed, and then the IDF has been increasingly threatening them all the time, telling them that an evacuation order is imminent all the time. They turned the entire neighborhoods all around Nasser as a red zone. So civilians are not allowed in a red zone. And there are tens of thousands of people in this red zone around the hospital because it's the lifeblood of the community.
Yeah.
But they all know that they're at incredible risk. And I tried not to leave the hospital at any time, but I was working one evening when Iran started shooting the missiles at
Yeah, yeah.
Tel Aviv, and the Iron Shield or whatever it's called was
Iron Dome, Iron
intercepting
Dome.
Iron
Yeah.
Dome. All of a sudden, everybody started running out of the emergency department, and I followed them, and I was standing there, and I kept thinking to myself, gosh, how strange is this to be like I could see myself on a Google Maps kind of like narrowing down to Gaza
Yeah.
and like boom, and then thinking, wow, I'm standing here watching overhead, the fireworks going on here. And I was kind of lost in that. And then all of a sudden I felt a tap on my shoulder, and there's this tiny little male nurse, and he looked at me and then he pointed inside, and I was like, crap, I ducked my head and ran back in the hospital. I realized that I was distracted, and I ran out I was like a sitting duck,
My goodness. Alright, so
outside.
so so when you saw that, I mean, you're looking up in the sky and, like, you're literally seeing missiles, and were
Yeah.
they getting shot down and explosions and things like that?
Yeah.
What, like dude,
Yeah.
that's so
It was
wild.
crazy.
That's so wild.
And I've seen that periodically on the news, Al Jazeera or whatever, but it was so unusual to see it in real life, But yeah, and that also says like people weren't out there celebrating. People were just standing there quietly watching, they're
Yeah,
observing
yeah,
this. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
another thing I think is important to say, so I was around basically, 99.5% Muslims while I was there, and people that everybody had been affected. Everybody had lost family and friends and loved ones. And we would have these really late night discussions. And, I did not hear radical rhetoric
yeah,
about, the death of Israel, and that, people were pissed off, people were angry, but mostly people just want an end to the war. They don't care how it happens. They just need the war to end. They are so depressed, I mean, you know, the world is full of existential crises, but my God, I cannot imagine being stuck there. No ability to get out. And it's so strange because on our way out, we stopped very briefly at the beach, and you look out over the water and you're like, wow, it seems like it'd be so natural and so
yeah,
easy just to
yeah,
leave that way. You can't do that. They limit fishermen to something like a mile. I guess I don't know the actual measurements, but a very short distance out in the water for fishing. And you can't fish that close to the shore to get anything significant, anything like on a commercial level. You have to go way
yeah,
out.
yeah.
People do try to extricate themselves by water, but when that happens, they usually just get shot and sunk.
Yeah, they either
You
get
know,
shot or they get caught. So I
yeah,
know you didn't leave the hospital much, but from your drives to and from the border, to and from, I don't know, the airport or wherever, I mean, it's destroyed though, right? Like is overall as you're driving through, it's not like driving through, Cancun, or driving through, like, if you go to Cabo or somewhere in Mexico, where before you get to the resorts and all that, you're driving through, somewhat undeveloped, it seems still. It's not that. It's like you're driving through just rubble, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's like it's one or two steps away from being dust. You know,
Okay. Okay.
and
Okay. Wow.
And I think there are a few little neighborhoods, and I didn't observe any of these myself, but I've seen online that there are a few neighborhoods here and there where there are a few buildings still standing, and that has to be out of design by the IDF. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
they have to have a reason for those still standing. I
There
can't even
must be.
imagine what they are, but
No, there absolutely must be. There absolutely must be. It's like our conversation, we're really focused on the here and now, but like what's almost difficult to even think about is what is the recovery like, and what is, all of these patients that you attended to that survived. My God, like what are they surviving into? You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like
yeah,
I feel like people that twist an ankle or break an ankle, or if you have a minor surgery, you have a 6-month recovery where your life is not even remotely normal, let
yeah,
alone what, like that 12-year-old boy with the brains out. Let's say he survived. What does
yeah,
the rest of his life look like?
yeah.
There's no way
Yeah,
he's
the rest
normal.
of his life looks like somebody wiping his ass every day.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and
And who? He
yeah,
probably
yeah,
lost all his parents.
yeah,
Half his family's probably dead.
yeah,
So that is
yeah,
such a great point. The rest of
yeah,
his life looks like somebody wiping his ass every day,
yeah,
and there's nobody to even
to
wipe
do
the
it.
kid's
Yeah.
ass.
And the level of starvation too, it's such a cruel reality. When I left,
Yeah.
all of the staff of the hospital were getting one small meal a day. And I'm
The
talking really
staff.
small meal a day, a
Oh my
snack a
God.
day.
Yeah.
And 2 days after we left, that stopped. The Ministry of Health no longer had the capacity to feed anybody. And, so I'm in daily communication with a lot of the physicians and nurses that I worked with. In just I've been gone for, a month, a little
Yeah.
more than a month. And my gosh, no, more like coming up on 2 months. And I can see a significant difference in the facial structure of the nurses and doctors that I worked with 2 months ago. I mean, they were thin then. They are truly skeletal now. I mean, truly skeletal. And, one of the things that is just so hard to take is that, for a lot of these, especially the young children and the really old people, is that when malnutrition and severe starvation gets to a certain point, they become delirious. They start having hallucinations. They start having paranoia. They start not trusting people. They stop talking. They stop playing. They don't do anything. They can't sleep. They can't get REM. They're in this state that is just almost like one step away from being catatonic.
Yeah.
And to see a giant population like that, especially the children, is just horrifying. I mean, it's insult to injury, right? I mean, it's like one thing to be starving to death, but do they have to be hallucinating and
Yeah.
fearful of their grandfather? I mean, it's just so horrific.
What an unbelievable experience for you. I mean, I know obviously there's God, I don't even want to say rewarding, but it's
Yeah.
rewarding. Well, I don't even know how to say it. It's like just this
Well,
is
I
something.
feel privileged
Yeah, okay, okay.
to having the opportunity to go and get my hands dirty and to kind of get her done. I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
really privileged to be able to do that. Um, it's a lot like just, my regular job, how privileged I am to be able to take care of people, but it was sort of amplified by, being there. People were so thankful, so appreciative. And I can't tell you how many times I'd be working on somebody and it'd be really hot. And I had to wear this vest, Rockma vest, and to identify me as an international physician. And somebody would tap me on the shoulder and they would hand me a water.
yeah.
Family would be like, "Oh, this doctor looks rough, man. I'm gonna give him some water." And it was
Mm,
funny too because every time they would hand me a thing of water, I would see that the seal was broken, so they just got tap water
yeah,
and
yeah,
handed it to me. But I was like, "Oh man, whatever." And so I was drinking water. I had diarrhea, terrible diarrhea, like most of the time I was there.
yeah,
And then I also made the mistake of, we started that Gaza formula countdown. And on one of our little promotional videos, I said, well, we're counting down 48 hours from now. And I said, I'm not going to eat until the end of that. So I didn't eat for 48 hours while I had terrible diarrhea.
yeah,
And I was like, as soon as I said that, I regretted it.
yeah.
I was like, oh man, that was not a
You
good
must have
move.
lost weight, huh? Did you
I
lose
did.
weight?
Yeah, I lost
Yeah.
20 pounds.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, yeah,
Dude,
but
unbelievable. You're my third one of these, and each time there are moments in the interview where I just like I don't even know what to say, but okay, let's shift gears a little bit to this Leahy Law because this is how I discovered you. I discovered you on Instagram as somebody stepping up, obviously talking about your experience in Gaza, but then also talking about something that quite frankly needs more attention. So let's talk about the Leahy Law. What is it? And then what can we do to help?
absolutely. Thanks. So the Leahy Law was passed bipartisan in like 1979 by Patrick Leahy, a Democrat from Vermont. And what the reason why it was created is that we were giving foreign governments money for military operations, and they were in turn, and doing gross human rights violations. They were murdering people and genocide and a cleansing with our money. Both Democrats and Republicans looked at this and they're like, this is not right. Americans do not want to spend our tax dollars to allow another country to murder people, you know, and we still don't. 60%, greater than 60% of Americans right now want the war to be over, that want the genocide to be over. And and so, I mean, that's really close to a super majority of Americans. But if you look at how much money we have sent Israel in the last decade, it's $58 billion. And we have 90 million taxpayers in the United States. And if you look at how much we've given them each with maybe a compounded annual rate of return of 7% over a decade, that's $1,000 per person. So tax-paying Americans have given Israel $1,000 each to kill, murder people, and enacted genocide in our name. And so we're
Yeah.
complicit by this. And so the Leahy Law was passed, and it's a law. It doesn't need to be voted on by Congress. It has been what we call triggered or enacted several times, Rwanda, Somalia, etc., and even a couple of small cases in Israel during this genocide. And what it says is that if there is a trigger, if there's credible evidence of gross human rights violations, all
Yeah.
funding has to stop immediately. Not next month, not a reassessment, but has to stop instantaneously. People have sort of analyzed the U.S. Financial impact on the genocide, and we're probably providing 50% of the cost of the genocide.
Yeah,
So
if
we're
not more.
funding this out of our taxpayer dollars, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to do it. I don't want to do it. And so what it requires basically a transparent review, and then that needs to be published. And it requires, very specific documentation about the, troop, the day, the time, the people involved. It requires high levels of detail, but there is so much detail available in this war. And the problem is why this hasn't been done is that, our legislators are wholly bought and owned by APAC.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
you know, I don't think the APAC is a lobbyist group. I think they're foreign agents. And, FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, started in 1938. And it was
Right.
initially started so that Nazi Germany would quit funding Nazi propaganda in the United
Right.
States.
Right. Right.
And that's exactly the same thing that's happening right now. And the problem is, it's kind of the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
FARA requires there to be transparency, full disclosure of who is funding it, who is making the decisions.
That's
But
right. That's
because
right.
APAC is just a U.S. lobbyist group, there's no transparency.
Right.
The
Right.
rules do not require uh, them to disclose sort of the inner workings of APAC. And I think if they did, they would find that they're most likely, true foreign agents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it's just, the lobbying, uh, APAC lobbying has spent, $157 million recently.
No, it's a well-oiled machine, but you know what? This Farah, Tucker Carlson's been talking about
Hmm.
this, Candace Owens has been talking
Yeah.
about this, Marjorie Taylor Greene now has been talking about this. The guys like Thomas Massey are advocates for obviously making Israel register as a foreign agent. So, I will tell you, one of my goals of bringing you on this podcast is to try and get our clips or our full episode in front of, people that definitely have a lot more reach than I do in order to propel you to get on other podcasts. I will say, I think we talked about this over the weekend, but there's a guy, I think a colleague of yours that was on the Theo Vaughn podcast
Yeah,
last week.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yep, that episode got a lot of traction, but I'll tell you what, man, I really am going to try and get you in front of these bigger players because
I would
again,
love that.
it hits harder when it's
Yeah.
a white American doctor. It just
Yeah.
does. It hits harder and it's more relatable for people. It's more relatable for even the baby boomer generation. Like I know my friends' parents who are going to watch this. Honestly, maybe the previous two doctors that I brought on didn't really resonate with them, but you're going to resonate with them because
Yeah.
you look like them,
Yeah.
or they look like you, or
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
look like their kid or something like that. So, all these semantics, they play into this and ideally get it to where, humanity realizes, hey, this shit is gotta stop. Like, this is gotta stop. What you witnessed, I wish we could just teleport that into everyone's
Yeah.
mind. And I'm sure that if everybody had what you have in your mind, they would be like, my
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
that is
And it's so
unreal.
hard. So there are days where I just want to run outside and grab the first person I see by the scruff of the neck and say, "You are
Yeah.
responsible
Yeah.
for this."
Yeah. Yeah.
This diffusion of responsibility that we have in the United States and really pretty much everywhere is just absolutely awful, and it has such a negative impact. Everybody needs to take more action. You know,
Yeah.
they need to.
Absolutely.
They say, "Oh, I'm going to call my legislator," but really do call them.
Yeah.
Tell them how you feel. Start, um, you know, not buying things that are made
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
boycotting products from Israel, et cetera. I mean, we do have different what levels of power,
There
you know,
are different ways to affect
yeah,
it. The problem is we live in this society where, quite frankly, until it affects me, and I'm using that as everyone, until it affects them, they don't give a shit. They're scrolling on their phone. I have friends now. And again, I don't want to like lose friendships over this, but like I have friends that to this day are still posting like, their latest meal. And I'm like,
yeah,
dude, who gives
yeah,
a shit what you ate yesterday?
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
care. I don't need to see your name on a
yeah,
Starbucks cup that
yeah.
they spelled it wrong. Like, do you realize what's going on in this world? But listen, it's people like you who step outside and quite frankly, even more impressive than I mean, I talk about it, but man, you walked the walk, man. You
Thanks.
walked the walk, so my hat's off to you. So you started a website. Give us that website, and I'm gonna put that in
Yeah,
the show.
so I think there are a couple of different ways of doing this. We have an informational website with a link to our Move On petition. It's
Okay.
LeahyReviewNow.org. So LeahyReviewNow.org. And I wish it was SmithReview.org because Leahy
Yeah,
is
yeah.
Leahy, which is a little bit tough, but Leahy Review Now. But if you really want to just go to the petition, the best way to get to the petition is at stoptheidf.org
Okay,
or
perfect.
stoptheidf.com.
Okay,
Just
perfect.
stop the IDF.
Okay,
And
perfect,
this is our
perfect.
only. So it seems to me like there are three ways we can deal with this genocide. Israel can unilaterally stop. They can help with reconstruction. They can bring in the proper amounts of nutrition immediately and can be reparations. And they can decide whether they're going to have a two-state solution or whatever they want to come up with the Palestinian people and a new government and constitution. Or that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's
The
not
other thing
gonna.
is that, we could have a United Nations Security Council resolution for an unconditional and permanent ceasefire. There have been multiple votes in the last
Yeah,
20 months. The United States has voted no, while all other 14 countries voted yes. So we are the only holdout in a United Nations Security Council vote for a permanent unconditional ceasefire. And um, never an advocate for putting boots on the ground and putting forces in, exposing young men and women to war. I think it's
yeah,
like the very last thing necessary. But this is starting to get to the point for me where I think it might be justified to have United Nations forces on the ground and protecting civilians and helping with reconstruction. And I know that's a lot to say, and it's something I'm sure I hope I don't live to regret, but that's the second solution. The third is the Leahy Review. It is a US law. It's fully enshrined and voted. It's on the books. It
yeah,
doesn't need to be voted on, and it's there. And our petition, we've got like 4,000 signatures, but to be honest, we need 1 million signatures. We need
yeah,
2 million signatures. 3,000, 4,000, whatever we have right now, it kind of breaks my heart. I mean,
yeah,
in my local town of 200,000 people, the local Free Palestine group, there are 5,000 of us. And we only have 3,000, and we've been pushing this out to the entire United States for a month. So, through programs like yours, Ray, I'm really hoping people will go to stoptheidf.com, stoptheidf.org, and sign the petition. We really need to go to Washington. We need to meet with our legislators, and we need to
yeah.
demand that they trigger a Leahy review.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will put all that in there. Listen, man, I just have to tell you, dude, I have so much respect for you
Thanks,
as a
Ray.
doctor, as a human being, more
Uh,
just as a human being, man. Like I said, you walked the walk with this. There's something to be said for those of us that have talked the talk. That's fine, but you have walked the walk with this.
Thanks, man.
I give you so much just admiration, and I know my audience is going to have a bunch more questions.
Thanks.
I am going to put all that information in.
Great.
And more importantly, like I said, I give you my commitment that I'm going to really try and get this in front of people that can be
Yeah.
a much bigger audience than me, because again, I think you're the perfect
Thanks.
spokesperson to make people realize this has nothing to do with religion. Hell, you're an atheist. This has nothing to do with the color of your skin. This has nothing to do with your nationality. All this is about is humanity. That's it.
Well said.
And we need to stop this. This is the first time in our lifetimes that something like this has been experienced.
Yeah.
And it's insane that it's
And what is
even
it
happening.
teaching all the young people that this is
Absolutely.
natural, this
Absolutely.
is acceptable? This is
Absolutely.
not. This needs
The
to be stopped quickly. And how slow this is, like, in World War II, it took us a long time to get involved. And this is the same thing. It's taking us a long time to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
really involved. But, I have a feeling it's going to end up, being Americans, US citizens that ultimately fix
Yeah,
this,
I think so too. I
Yeah.
think people are getting to the point where they're gonna say enough is enough. There's a huge fracturing of Trump's base, the MAGA
Absolutely.
movement. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got you've got hardcore MAGA people that are like, enough is enough. We're done with this. This is
Yeah.
this is not what we voted for. This is
Absolutely.
not what we signed up for. They're actually more boisterous than the Democrats are right now.
Yeah, I
And so
agree with
like,
you.
yeah, and that's crazy, by the way, as well. So, like, I've said on this podcast a few times, like, why is Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, why are they not now calling Trump Hitler? Like,
Yeah.
he's actually acting like Hitler. So where are you now? So that makes you think, wait a minute, are they all in on this together?
You know,
Are they all, slaves
just
to
they're
Israel?
just neoliberal, status quo. They're making their investments in Wall
Yeah,
Street,
exactly.
and they don't care about real people.
Yeah, they
That's the
don't
thing
care.
that's so depressing about the Democratic Party, is that, I was initially really excited when Obama initially won. I vomited in my mouth when I voted for him the second time.
Yeah, yeah,
And they do not care about the middle class. And
that's
unfortunately, I
right.
think the current administration doesn't either. And
No,
I
they
would
don't.
love to see, a real human being populist run for president that, knows what it takes to make the middle class have a renaissance,
Yeah,
have upward
absolutely.
mobility, have disposable income, have, 4 day work week, who can buy toys and houses and have leisure time, and put their kids through college without difficulty. There's been no legislator, no president that I've seen in my lifetime that has been truly interested in doing that.
No, there definitely
It's time for a
hasn't. Everybody
change.
everybody thought Trump was the guy, but he's
Yeah.
clearly shown himself not to
Yeah.
be. So,
Well,
all
I
right.
have some big news though, Ray.
Yeah.
I'm either going to go back to Gaza the first 2 weeks of September,
Wow.
or I'm going to be on the Global Samud flotilla,
Oh, I
probably
saw
leaving
that.
from Tangier. So I'm going to
Yeah.
probably do one of those two things, but I'm going to be still, really working on the Leahy Law review.
That's
So
amazing, man. That's
yeah,
amazing. Well, you know what? Either one, if you end up doing it, maybe we can set up something to do like an episode together from either Gaza or from the flotilla. That would be amazing.
yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that.
All right. All right.
Another thing too is that I think the next time I go to California, we should go out to dinner.
I would love that, man. It's
Yeah.
dinner's on me. Dinner is
Oh my gosh,
absolutely on me. I would
that'd be great.
absolutely love that. All right, listen, everybody. I hope you guys, God, I say this after every episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you enjoyed it, which I don't even know. If you did not get something out of this episode and you did not enjoy it, then I'd appreciate it if you no longer listen to my podcast, because this was honestly just such an episode rooted in humanity, brother. It really
Thanks, man.
was. And I'll give you you have all my info, but you come to California, we need to break bread together
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
absolutely have dinner together. And you can stay with me, whatever you need, man,
Thanks, man.
because my admiration for you is just, it's just off the charts.
That's mutual.
Well, I appreciate that. All right, everybody, call a spade, Dr. Mark Brauner. I'm going to put all the links below. Let's all sign this petition, stoptheidf.com, stoptheidf.org. I'll put everything in here, the Leahy Law, and then next time we talk with Dr. Mark Brauner, it'll be either be from Gaza or from the flotilla. Either one will be amazing. All right, hang on the line, Mark. All right, everybody, we'll talk to you soon.
This episode was brought to you by Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zip more, smoke less. Totally satisfying, discreet, and delicious. Zippix nicotine-infused toothpicks are available in 6 great flavors, each containing at least 2 milligrams of nicotine to curb those cravings. Zippix is FDA registered and proudly made in the USA. Use discount code DSD for 10% off your order at zippixtoothpicks.com. Zip more, smoke less, save 10%.